prochaine conférence. Et je vous présente notre conférencier qui est M. Aaron Shull. Petite introduction bien spéciale pour lui avant que je vous parle un petit peu de son pedigree. Donc, is a fearless expert who boldly navigates the treacherous terrains of international law, data protection, cybersecurity, and national security. Every day, he battles to make our country a better, safer, and a more prosperous place for all. J'aurais presque envie d'avoir une musique des Avengers qui dit ça quand je le présente. Il me semble que ça fait très important. Alors, Maître Shull est directeur général et avocat général au Center for International Governance Innovation, CIGI, à Waterloo, en Ontario. Il a récemment conclu un rapport fort intéressant qui est intitulé Reimagining a Canadian National Security Strategy. Et en novembre dernier, j'ai eu la chance, pas en novembre dernier, oui, c'était en 2022, c'est vrai, c'est déjà. En novembre dernier, j'ai eu la chance de le rencontrer au FORPIC, qui est le Forum international de la cybersécurité, où il l'a présenté avec notre président, M. Durand. Et d'ailleurs, avec M. Durand, il a aussi coécrit un article qui est paru dans le Globe and Mail dernièrement sur l'intersection entre le pays et la sécurité nationale. Mesdames et messieurs, Aaron Shull.
Thank you all very much. It is a pleasure, and it's an honor for me to be here with you. I want to thank David for the kind invite. We worked together a little bit in this space, and so you think, well, what is a national security guy like me doing with an IP lawyer like him? Well, I'm going to convince you of that today. We've become fast friends, and it's a consequence of the fact that there is such a nexus between our two areas of work. So let me ask you a quick question. Well, you know what? Let me back up a step. I have a thesis. My thesis is that everyone in this room is a national security practitioner. Put your hand up if you think you're a national security practitioner. We got a couple. Okay. Let me see if by the end of my talk I can convince you that you are. So what do we mean when we talk about national security and intellectual property, safeguarding innovation? Well, let's talk about the core sectors of our economy. Artificial intelligence. Let's talk about aerospace, quantum computing, ocean technology, biopharma. These are all core industries that are vital to the prosperity of our country, that are driven principally by intellectual property and data. So as the previous speakers talked about, when we look at the intersection between intellectual property and data and valuation, it's clear that the driving force of our economic vitality is intangible. If you look at the value of the major companies out there, most of the value stock of those companies isn't tangible assets. It's not factories, it's not bricks and mortar, it's not assembly lines. But the principal value rests in their patent portfolios and in their data assets. This is the economy that we live in now. Value is driven by these. And let me tell you that there is a growing threat from state actors and non-state actors that are trying to steal our prosperity, that are trying to steal our future. This is the world we live in. And I know it's fundamentally like non-Canadian, right? To think that the world is a nasty place. We're all very kind. We're all very cool. We're all very easy to get along with. And as a consequence of that, we think the world is the same. It's not. There are organizations that are being targeted, academia, universities, startups, big companies, and government departments alike are all susceptible to this. They are all being actively targeted there's insider threats, so employees, former employees, students, professors, contractors can actually be working for foreign entities trying to steal our intellectual property. They do this through various ways, but cyber is one of the principal exploits. Malware, Trojans, worms, rootkits, keyloggers, and ransomware. So this is the world that we live in, where organizations are being targeted through both human and non-human means with a view to stealing our national prosperity. Because the weaker we are, the easier it is to push us around, right? And what can be stolen from us and added to another state's well-being makes them stronger. So when you think about intellectual property, when you're working with and advising companies, note that we live in a geopolitical environment. It's not just one company and one patent, but it's part of a broader ecosystem. And so that's another thing that we need to be thinking about. So let me, oh, I'm not sure what's up with this. Well, this slide, so basically, I want to tell you about a case study. So if you don't believe me, what I'm actually talking about here, okay? If you don't believe me, the best publicized event was in 2014, where the National Research Council of Canada was targeted. And we know this because it's publicly available, where hackers at the behest of the Chinese state broke into the National Research Council of Canada. And well, what were they after, you ask? I'm glad that you asked. They were after intellectual property, trade secrets, and other sensitive data. So here we have one of the principal funding institutions in our entire country that's driving innovation, that's driving research, that's driving prosperity, and adversarial state actors go after it to steal intellectual property and sensitive data. This is the world we live in, and this is just one published account. Just one. Believe me, there's more. So now, that was 2014. Do you think it's gotten better since then? Or do you think it's gotten worse since then? Who thinks it's gotten better? No one. That's the right answer. Who thinks Canada's relationship with China is better or worse? Eh? Anybody? Yeah, right? So it's getting worse. The geopolitical environment is getting worse. So now, have a look at this. This is crazy. I had to double check that number. Cybercrime is projected to steal $23.8 trillion out of the global economy. Now, this is everything, right? This is all of this stuff. This is damage and destruction to data. This is the actual stuff that gets stolen, lost productivity, theft of IP, theft of personal and financial data, the disruption that comes as a consequence of stuff like this. I don't know if any of you have ever been working with a company that's been breached, but believe me, it's not comfortable. So there's a huge disruption to business, forensic investigations, restoration, and deleting the data and getting your systems back up, to say nothing of the reputational harm. $23.8 trillion. I almost fell out of my chair when I read that. So that's the world we live in. If you believe what I'm saying about the principal value of companies being accrued by virtue of data and intellectual property, if you believe what I'm saying about this all being set to get much, much worse, and if you believe what I'm saying about the geopolitical environment that we all operate in, it's going to lead to a couple of conclusions. Oh, okay, here. But before we get to the conclusions, what's being done? Like, what's actually happening right now? Well, the government's trying to do stuff, and they're all over the place. There's Bill C-26 trying to protect cyber systems. There's going to be an economic security strategy. There's a critical minerals strategy. We're changing the Investment Canada Act, and I won't bore you to death with what's with the Investment Canada Act and the revisions that are taking place right now in Parliament, but just I'll say one thing about this. We're going to be getting a lot tougher on investments from state-owned enterprises and from entities that are connected to adversarial states. So we're in this country, we're finally waking up to the fact that the world's not a nice place. We're waking up to the fact that it's a rough place and that people are trying to steal prosperity from us. They're trying to steal security from us. So let's dive into one more specific example. There's now guidelines around research at universities. So now grant applications are going to be screened much more closely. And they're going to be screened for military, national defense, state security entities of foreign states that pose a risk to our national security. But wait a minute, I thought we were talking about university research here, right? How can university research possibly be a threat to our national security? goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? The foundations of our economic prosperity, the foundations of our stability, the foundations of our society all now rest on a coherent architecture between national security, intellectual property, foreign policy, in our innovation stack. It's all part of the same suite of policies. It is what makes Canada, Canada. So, what does this mean for you? How can we strengthen Canada's resilience? Well, we all need to work together. National security for too long was seen as a purview of a few classified officials all working together in Ottawa in a very, very small community, you know, looking at classified documents under a blanket with a flashlight so no one could see what they were looking at. That is not national security anymore, right? The world has changed. National security, economic prosperity is now a whole of Canada affair. It's not just for officials in Ottawa, but indeed it's for all of us. We all have a role to play. And so what is your role? You're at the forefront of advising companies. You're at the forefront of engaging entrepreneurs. You're at the forefront of securing our prosperity. And just knowing that you are part of a geopolitical operating environment, just knowing that adversarial states are going to be targeting the companies that you're working with in order to steal our prosperity is one step. But the second step, and I think the more important step, is for you to realize yourselves that you are all now actually national security practitioners. So now who thinks that they're a national security practitioner? We got them. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. It was good to be with you.
Alors, je ne sais pas si on a le temps pour 2-3 questions. Aaron, are you
Yeah.
ready to answer some questions? We still have like 2 minutes.
Sure, yeah. If someone wants to ask a question, I'm keen.
J'ai envie de l'appeler Capitaine IP. Any questions?
Quick one.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the very insightful presentation. I just had a quick question for you. Very early in my career, a few years ago, I was actually interning at Pratt & Whitney, Canada, and I was able to witness an incident into which a foreign government was able to have access to strategic military assets that were obtained not in what I believed was, you know, high energy spy activity. It was actually just bought by a controlled company abroad. So my question for you is, in essence, super interesting to see that there's a lot of measures and controls federally, nationally, to be able to ensure that those incidents don't happen in the future. However, do you think that businesses should be making a step into ensuring that their internal controls, processes, etc., refrain those type of risks from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I do. It's a good question, and you're absolutely right. Why do something like, so basically the first rule of an intelligence operation is why do something complicated when something simple will do? And usually, honestly, like some of the exploits are sex, drugs, and money. So if you can use sex, drugs, or money, then just do that, right? And so what you're talking about is money. It's the strategic acquisition of a company with likely, in the case that you're talking about, with an ulterior or malicious motive. Of course that happens, absolutely. And the point here is, I think that you're making, and the one that I would agree with wholeheartedly, is we need to be live to that. You cannot do the ostrich where you just stick your head in the sand. We need to understand the world we're operating in. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Hello, Alex Nicolaescu, Director of IP at Ericsson. So thank you very much first for the very insightful 20 minutes. My question is sort of naive, is how often does this happen? I mean, we hear it happens, we probably see just the tip of the iceberg, we see things in the news and everything, but just as an analogy, when you go out on the street, robberies don't happen every corner, and that's one of the reasons you go out of the street. So going back to stealing of confidential information, if you are an IP department at Ericsson or at Bombardier or a private firm dealing with such high-tech clients, what's the likelihood, based to your knowledge, that at some point you will be targeted?
So there's maybe two answers to that question. The first is that I'm not security cleared, okay? I'm just some guy, so all I'm referring to is what's publicly available information. But let me give you a more nuanced answer from General Keith Alexander. General Keith Alexander was the head of the NSA, or the National Security Administration in the United States. This is the principal agency that deals with cryptology and basically cyber warfare. And General Keith Alexander said what he was seeing in terms of, in this context, it was Chinese economic cyber espionage against the US. He said it was the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. So the answer that I've often given to companies is that if you haven't been hacked, it's probably just because you don't know it yet. You probably have. Okay?
Well said.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
We have time for a last question. Une dernière question pour Monsieur Shull. J'ai oublié de préciser à l'entrée, mais sûrement vous avez constaté, nous avons de la traduction simultanée. Donc, si vous voulez poser votre question en français, il n'y a pas de souci. Vous pouvez aller chercher les petits moniteurs à l'arrière et poser votre question aussi en français, sans problème. Pas d'autres questions? Mr. Shull?
All good.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everybody.
so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Alors, on